Welcome to Harbinger's flagship interactive webinar, Power Hour. Select the right speaker for audio output. Test your speaker from audio settings. If necessary, join the webinar using your phone. Use the Q&A panel to share your questions. This webinar is being recorded. Attendees will receive the recording. Let's tune in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Power Hour by Harbinger. I am Shrikant Pattathil, and I'm delighted to be your host today. We're going to discuss a very interesting topic on re-architecting digital learning businesses in the age of AI. As we all know, the digital learning industry is currently, because of AI, at an inflection point. Today, as we speak, AI is changing the rules of the game. And as a result, learning businesses probably need to rethink on how they create value, how to engage with learners in new ways, and build a sustainable growth in the AI-driven business world. To to explore these shifts, we have an outstanding panel today, and I'll bring them in very soon, who have a deep experience in digital transformation, learning technology, and AI-enabled innovation. So it'll be my pleasure to post some interesting questions to them and learn from them and share experiences as to how to re-architect digital businesses in this age of AI. Quickly about myself, I am a technologist at heart, and my passion has always been, building platforms, solutions, working with customers, solving complex engineering problems, primarily in the space of HR, learning, and workforce technology. And today's topic is kind of close there in terms of how digital businesses or learning businesses are rethinking or how they should rethink and recalibrate themselves for the future. As we go through the discussion, I just wanted to give you a very quick overview of some of the things that we are going to cover. Of course, we'll deep dive into some more topics here. But to very simply put it, I mean, we are mostly looking at it from the buyer's lens as to what the buyer expectations are or the learner expectations are, and how do digital learning businesses make sure that expectations are met while they are using AI or leveraging AI or delivering value at a rapid pace using AI. So that's going to be the focus to as far as discussion is concerned, and of course we'll take a few detours depending upon how the discussion flows. But mostly this is what we're going to do. So one of the important data points as we were creating this material, putting this material together, that came up was, and Google mentioned this, that in the last, for the first time in 3 years, AI is being used more in the learning context. And what it means is that creating learning or delivering learning in some form or building content probably has become easy, and it's available much more widely. So if you're a digital learning provider or if you're a consumer of learning and you want to do it in a methodical or a strategic way, it's an opportunity as well as it's also a threat. And I think that premise we will go through in more detail in our discussion today, saying that, okay, how does it disrupt the business, or is it disrupting the business? And how do we need to make adjustments to that, or leverage it as an opportunity to provide more value? Let's start with a poll where maybe all of you can also share your views and where you are seeing AI creating the most value in your learning solutions, whether you're building learning, whether you're building content, or you're consuming this. What are the things that you are observing, whether it's content production, personalization, learning recommendations, assessments for skill validation, or analytics. So if you can share your thoughts, take a minute, take 30 seconds, and uh, you know it'll help us in the ongoing discussion. Okay, I'll give you like about another 10 seconds for people to just kind of think. You can of course choose multiple options as well, because it's not like a just one. Okay, looks like we've got a fair amount of responses. So let me end the poll now, and let's look at the analytics quickly. I'm assuming all of you can see the results here. So the results show that most of you are thinking that, the content production has probably changed, or there's where the most value is being created because of learning, followed by assessments, then learning recommendations. I also see, some words on learning analytics and personalization. So interesting. And I think, I'm sure, the panelists also have a view on this. So on that note, let me move in and head into our discussions. Thank you for taking the poll and sharing your views. I appreciate that. So without further ado, let me bring in our panelists, starting with Ajith Kallambella, Senior Vice President and Head of Engineering at Relias. Welcome, Ajith. If you could please introduce yourself and also share why this topic interests you.
Thank you, Shrikant, for that introduction. I'm Ajith Kallambella. I serve as the Senior VP of Engineering here at Relias, which is a part of the Bertelsmann's Education Group. So look, I've spent close to 3 decades in engineering and engineering leadership roles, starting from startups to Amazon and Disney, and now in digital learning. And across all these environments, I've kind of carried what I would call a startup mindset. This is truly a bias towards building a discomfort with the status quo and a conviction that the interesting problems, like in your introduction, are always the ones that ask you to rethink our foundations and rethink our assumptions. What makes this topic an interesting one for me, honestly, is that digital learning is at one of those very rare moments where the foundations, the assumptions, the hitherto status quo are genuinely up for renegotiation and re-examination. I mean, for most of the last 20 years or so, the industry has sort of competed on the content volume, delivery efficiency, and operational scale. AI doesn't not just accelerate those things, it fundamentally changes what is worth competing on in the first place. So I'm here because, while I think the providers who treat AI as a productivity tool are going to miss this moment completely, and the ones that who treat this as a reason to re-architect, as a reason to rethink how the value is created and delivered, are going to define truly the next decade that is to come, that will be catalyzed by the AI. So I'm definitely looking forward to unpacking that with Gary here and Poonam.
Hey, thanks, Ajit. And I'm sure you have a lot of perspectives on this. So let's go deeper in this as the discussion progresses. Now, let me welcome Gary Greenwood. Gary, thanks for joining us. Gary is the director and of digital and AI transformation at DDI. Gary, if you can please introduce yourself and also, what connects you with this particular topic. If
Yeah.
you can share that, that'll be nice.
Yeah. First off, Shrikant, thank you for having me. Thanks for everybody for joining. Um, yeah. So a little bit about my background. I have a very similar background to Shrikant and Ajith. Been a technologist at heart kind of my entire life. Started my career software engineering, building kind of large scale systems at banks and some other financial institutions. And then most recently, I've been working for McKinsey and Company before joining DDI. So spent a number of years there working in technology transformation, digital transformation, AI, and innovation, and also partnered heavily with McKinsey Academy in delivering trainings, especially when we hit like kind of the COVID times and everything really went virtual. Why this is like such a passionate subject for me is all the things that Ajith was just mentioning. We have we're at the cusp of this technology transformation that's happening across the entire industry, and I do agree that the folks who are using this just strictly for speed which we can roll content out and the volume of content that we're creating, I think are really going to miss the opportunity that we have in front of us. I really feel that it's not only going to be the next decade, it's going to be the next, 50 years probably before we see a transformation like this that's going to impact this industry. And more importantly, all of the outcomes and the outputs that this industry is really focused on. The poll that we did earlier of, is this going to be content or assessment? I think the real question, and this might be a little bit provocative, but are we actually using AI to change the leadership behaviors? That's really what's at the core of this. And I think the content, the assessment results, the data that we gather, the ability to customize, those are all some of the outputs, but the overall outcome is what really excites me. Um,
Mm.
I've spent the majority of my career focused on the intersection of business transformation and leadership. And there's really a ripe area in the industry for all of us to have impact at this point. So that's why I'm super excited to be here and look forward to having a great conversation with everybody involved.
Hey, thanks, Gary. I mean, of course, you've been so close at, building technology in the learning domain and AI and so forth. So I'm sure, you have a lot of perspectives and uh, points to share, and I look forward to that. Let me now bring in Poonam. Poonam, welcome. Thanks for being the joining us as a panelist. Poonam Jaypuriya is Vice President eLearning at Harbinger Group. She's a colleague of mine. Poonam, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us why you like eLearning so much.
Absolutely, Shrikant. First of all, thank you for having me on the panel and good morning to people online. I'm Poonam and I've been fortunate to spend over 20 years helping learning organizations navigate industry transitions. I, in fact, often joke with my colleagues that I survived almost major disruptions this industry has seen, from CD-ROMs to Flash to mobile learning to LMS platforms, LXP, and now AI. What interests me about this topic is that we are at another major inflection point. I think Ajit and Gary, both of my panel members here, alluded to that. For the first time, I think the challenge isn't just operating the business more efficiently using AI, but it is forcing each one of us to rethink about the product, the learning design, and the buyer value they can get through this. So what's interesting is through my work, I get to see both the sides, the technology transformation and the learning transformation. And that's where I believe some of the most interesting opportunities and challenges are emerging today. So that keeps me excited.
Great. Thanks, Poonam. We certainly look forward to, more views from you and both your experience on the content side as well as on the, building learning technology, how that intersects with this particular discussion. So look forward to that. Let me first start with an interesting question, and let me pose that to Ajit first. And we talked a little bit about content production. So Ajit, And everybody said that, where AI brings the most value is content production. So what do you think is the most, is that really true when you look at it as a learning solutions company and a platform company, or are we missing something? What are your thoughts on this?
So it was not surprising to me to see the poll essentially overwhelmingly suggests that AI creates a major differentiation and strategic advantage in content production. So, let's kind of zoom in on sort of what are the key elements for a learning system. So there is content, there is the experience of learning itself, and then there is the data about the learning experience, and the learners, and so on. So honestly, the question is slightly a miscast, because the moment you begin to pick one of those three things, content, learning experience, and data, you're already losing. And let me talk to you why. The strategic advantage, counterintuitively, actually doesn't live inside the content at all, or experience at all, or data at all. It lives in the orchestration across all the three.
Mhm.
That orchestration is increasingly being done by AI agents. And so it needs to be visible and legible to all of them. Now, that said, if I had to rank the three things by where I see the sort of the durable advantage is being built across the industry today, I would put data first, experience second, and content third. Again, very counterintuitively. Look, the reason is very simple. The data is the only one of the three things that actually compounds in value. It's the only thing that compounds in value. Content obviously gets cheaper to produce every quarter, every week. And AI is sort of blurring the line between authoring the content, assembling the content. Um, when you get to learning experience, those learning experience patterns are fairly easy to replicate today with AI driven innovation that can put together products and websites in hours and days rather than in weeks and quarters. But the data, that especially the kind of data that sits inside, that tells the providers how learners actually engage, like what do they struggle with, what predicts sort of retention or proficiency, that data is only an asset that improves with use. And so the interesting part of this conversation is that data only becomes strategic when it can move, that organizations kind of getting the real leverage of AI across the industry are the ones that who have made their data legible to this, what we have been calling as sort of agentic systems. The sort of the structured, permissioned, addressable data with insights around it, and different providers have different vernacular on how they describe that. We call them, someone calls it agent hub, someone calls it the inference layer. But honestly, everyone is sort of running models on top of the data and the ground truth, and wondering why or how they can glean additional insights from it. I think the one more thing that's worth saying about is the experience layer. See how I am intentionally avoiding talking about content, because I think it's important, but actually not as important as the other two things that I'm talking about. So we talked about data. Let's talk about the experience layer. The same data and content now gets to show up in vastly more modalities that was economically very hard to achieve. It was not feasible at all. We talk, the industry is moving towards micro learnings, immersive simulations, conversational avatars, how the content is delivered and how the learners engage with. That is truly the experience that is being disrupted by the new capabilities that AI is unleashing. Hyper personalized experiences, even when the persona delivering the content sort of adapts to the learner persona, was something unthinkable even 6 to 8 months ago. So only providers whose data is legible to across the entire AI ecosystem and are able to actually personalize it can actually take advantage of it. So if you want the framing to be sort of a sound bite, I would put it this way, right? Content gives you a presence, but experience gives you a preference among your customer base. And data gives you sort of a compounding advantage across both content and experience. So two of them sort of decays over a period of time, but one of them grows. That is truly the data that you can use to enrich the learner experience while taking advantage of what AI can do to your how your content is generated and produced.
Yeah, fair enough, Ajit. I think that's a very well put together thought in terms of, as content probably is kind of getting kind of commoditized a little bit, how do you go up the value chain by thinking about data and experience? And I think I'm sure Gary has a point of view on that. Let me bring him in and kind of ask him this particular question as to how does he think about this particular aspect, like everybody talking about content production, that getting very cheap and therefore it's disrupting the business. So Gary, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a race for the bottom for actually creating the content. It's going to be, who can actually do it the cheapest with the lowest token usage and have it be the most meaningful. Certainly agree on that front, but I want to double down a little bit on what Ajit said. The data is so important. Um, Most organizations, and I think this was a McKinsey statistic that we always look for whenever we were engaging with clients, where 80% of organizations have data in their organization that they're not strategically leveraging for to create differentiation. And I think probably most folks in the content creation industry in this space probably looks back at the history of their company and said, man, I wish we would have been gathering more data on the way people are interacting with our products and being able to use that for meaningful insights. And that really feeds into a lot of what was previously mentioned of that data is like going to be front and center at creating strategic advantage for, kind of all of the companies that are going to be moving into this, new world of content creation and learning. So I started thinking about things of like individuals, how they interact with content,
Mm.
what data can we harness from that, and how can we start to use that for number one, hyper personalization of the content. Having content that sits on the shelf that is, built, previously for all flavors of all individuals at all leadership levels for all industries. While good, while that's important for us to have a gold standard and face validity validated content, how do we actually make that more specific using the data that we gather about the individuals using these courses? How do we start actually leveraging that to customize so that the courses are more specific for the way that they learn and what actually resonates with them and with what and the things that actually help them learn better and demonstrate that they're leveraging these concepts in their day to day. But more importantly, there's a whole world of digital twins that AI is going to enable, where we
Mm.
can, start running simulations on what if Gary was in this scenario? What if we were using a hiring situation? We could have digital twins of the actual team with the actual, kind of business challenges that you would face in this role, and have assessments be hyper focused or hyper personalized for the organization, the individuals, and even the learners. So there's really an amazing world and a lot of reimagining what is possible and questioning those old values and norms that we've had around content creation and learning for a long time. This is really going to create strategic advantage for the organizations that actually start to go after these and leverage that data, gather it, leverage it, put insights around it, and actually start testing it, with their learners.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I think this whole point about, there was personalization happening at a certain level before AI, but to go to an actual individual learner and to transform based on and to personalize it at that level, and that whether you're talking about skill or whether you're talking about job aid or something, and in ways that they would like to consume based on the data and experience that you can deliver is
Yeah.
is 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 very interesting, and that's where probably the platform and the content need to come together to kind of enable it. So makes a lot
Yep.
of sense. Poonam, I know you have a point of view on this.
Yeah, I think Ajit and Gary have covered quite a bit, and I completely agree, and I'm aligned with them. So, the way I describe this is it's a flywheel with content, experience, and data. And the real advantage is when they really come together, like Ajit said, rather than just one of the other. And what I have seen is, when for digital businesses, the depth of the catalog, earlier the questions was how many courses do you have? Whether it's SME validated, is it instructionally consistent? So there were a lot of the production related questions to be handled at scale. But what AI is changing is the equation completely, like Ajit said, because content is faster and cheaper now. So the value is really in the data with experience and content. So completely agree with Ajit and Gary.
Hey, thanks, Poonam, for sharing your thoughts on that. And yeah, I think the flywheel is a good analogy to sum it up. So thank you for that. Made my job easier. So let me get to the next question that might be there from a listener point of view, which is about how are the how are you thinking about learning design? Because when it comes to this new age of building and leveraging AI to build stuff, and also, learners consuming it differently. Um, Ajit, specifically starting with you, how are you thinking that? Are you saying that no, we need to completely relook at the way we do learning design, or we have to incrementally build on something? What your thoughts on that?
Look, it is. It's my opinion, and the industry reflects it, that learning is moving towards outcomes rather than learning as an activity, right? So the course or the content is sort of the vehicle. It's sort of a container, but really the focus has shifted from that to what is the outcome of the learning, right? Sort of once you accept that content is never really your mode and it was never your mode, you begin to look at a broader reframing of learning design is no longer a content production pipeline, right?
Mm.
Rather, it is shifting towards a, a broader workforce readiness conversation, right? The unit of work these providers are producing is no longer a course or a content or an assessment. It is truly the validated capability of a person inside your workforce to do a specific thing on the job, right? And then it has magnifying effects at a workforce level. So if I had to summarize the sort of the shift, I would reframe it across these following five things, right? So the first thing that we are saying is sort of we have to atomize, sort of start thinking about courses or units and start thinking about what I would call capability units that can be assembled, recombined, and matched towards a specific learning objective, right? The discipline becomes one of the matching of the content to competencies and outcomes and objectives rather than just producing it and then hoping that the objectives are met. And the second theme is sort of the what I would call instrumenting the skill and not instrumenting the seat. I mean, you cannot manage what you cannot see. I was reading somewhere that the World Economic Forum has put together the half life of a learned technical skill is about 2.5 years. So in every 2.5 years, you forget half of what you've learned, right? Now, the skills are changing about two-thirds faster, right? Which means, especially in AI exposed roles. So which means you cannot manage a 2.5 year skill half-life with a static competency framework that's reviewed annually. That's how most of our large enterprises operate today. it has to be continuous.
Mhm.
It has to be instrumented when you're collecting data about skill levels and competencies, and it's always on. Learning is always on. Gone are those days when you set aside, Fridays for learning. It's always on. And here is the honest truth that ties it together, right? The completion of a course or a skill does not equal competency validation. So learning design is shifting towards continuous, instrumented, outcome driven. And the third theme here is sort of learning design has to be for sort of what I call just in time delivery in the flow of work. So learning is not a dedicated, separate, segmented activity anymore. The future of the learning design is not that, like, how do we get our learners into our environment? How do we put learning on somebody's individual development plan? It's really about how we put the right capability into the learner's environment at the real moment they need it. So industry calls this micro learning, right? So, or some people call it performance support. Some people call it in-app guidance. But the idea here is there are no longer sort of this novel formats that we have learned to rely on, and the medium is no longer learning management systems, right? It is truly the learning happens with the tools that the learner already lives in, right? And then the last part I would like to call out in the learning system design is the design for what I call immersion learning and the modality of the learner's choice. The same skill can now be developed through let's say a micro learning unit, an immersive simulation, a role play, or a guided walkthrough. Sort of what AI is doing is that it's kind of collapsing the cost across all of them, which means hyper personalization kind of becomes economically, computationally very feasible. The learner who learns the best from a video gets to learn from a video. The one who needs, let's say, a practice of a difficult conversation, he gets a role play. The one who, motivated by sort of their favorite athlete or a mentor, can get an avatar that's delivering the content. So the sort of the discipline shifts from authoring one path to designing a space with which the sort of the right modality is selected for the right moment of the learner. So I think these are sort of what I call the massive design shifts, sort of platonic design shifts that are happening that we can even contemplate because of what AI is able to do.
True. And I think those are great points, Ajit. And I think, uh, you know, thinking about the way I would like to probably visualize what you just said was, thinking about the learner and not making learning like a separate activity, bringing it as a part of the routine, or, making it to, as seamless as possible is probably the future. And that's how you need to think about learning design. And I think on that note, let me also bring in Poonam. Poonam, your thoughts on this particular topic. And I know you work quite a bit with content and systems, so probably you have, you know, views uh, from both perspectives.
No, thanks, Shrikant. And I'll try probably build on top of what Ajit basically said. So the way I see we should think on learning design is now at three levels. The first is the shift from course first design to learner context first design. So basically earlier, most of the processes or the thought process started with a course, like what are the objectives, what are the modules, which media should I produce, which interaction should I add, and add some knowledge checks and complete the course, right? That was the thought process. Now the starting point should be who is the learner? What role are they in? What task are they trying to perform? What is their proficiency? What support do they need at that moment? So if we start thinking that, suddenly the way you think is in the learner context, and that actually guides your learning design. So that's one. Second is, again, I think Ajit also alluded to that, is from fixed formats to a fluid format. So earlier content was often designed as one course, one video, one PDF, one assessment, something of that sort. But with AI, if I can take the source content and can produce it in multiple forms, whether it's a video, checklist, someone likes a simulation, a coach conversation, so suddenly the design challenge is no longer like how do I create a course and in which authoring tool, but how do I structure the knowledge so that it can be reused intelligently across formats, roles, and moments of need. So that really changes and forces you to think differently on how you structure the content, save it, bring it back in front of the learner in different forms. So that's my second general thought which we put in. And the third is knowledge checks to proficiency evidence. That's the third shift. And I feel that's a big one because for years, the assessment was our way to say, do ask some recall questions and say, do you remember this? And if yes, then you are capable and you're certified to go and do your job. But now people are asking questions like, how can I apply that in my day to day? And these assessments need to be more scenario based, performance based, and it should be connected to the job readiness rather than just completion. So, simple way I would say to think about this is learning design earlier ended at completion. And now it has to continue until the evidence of readiness is proved. So, how does this impact? Is Because it almost makes you rethink your content architecture, instructional design, platform design. So now you're thinking even the platform has to deliver this, and analytics, which will capture all this. So a digital learning provider should want to, if we want to stay relevant, they need to design not just the assets, but even collect those learning signals, the data which will prove that the learner is becoming more capable or is now getting the capability to do the job.
Makes sense, Poonam. I think that's very well put from different perspectives, and I'm sure again, like putting the learner in the center and then thinking of the whole platform and the content capabilities from that makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'll just pose a question to Gary here, like out of blue. Gary, what about the trust factor? I mean, what do you think about there's like we earlier talked about, there's a lot of content, anybody can take content from wherever or probably consume it. But how you have any thoughts about the whole trust factor of this content, and
Yeah.
is there something that you can share?
Definitely do. I mean, like I think the face validity of content, how is it backed up by scientific research? Can we actually stand on, the research around the content, the assessments, whatever it is? Is it grounded in those things? It's still going to remain very, very important. I think through like, I have young sons and how much content that they consume from YouTube and TikTok that is just, I would say, absolute garbage. But and it's not really teaching them anything, or they're not really learning. And I think through how is like learners, how are they changing from the next generations? And it's going to be really, really important that just not the mountain of content that we can create, but like the little bit of content that actually has meaningful outcomes attached to it. I think of Poonam's example of the flywheel, and it makes me think of a very specific antidote that I had experienced with my boys. One of my younger son was struggling at school to learn some concepts, and I was, being a technologist, I'm playing around with different tools, and I actually use the likeness of his favorite Argentinian soccer player to teach him some math concepts and to teach him states and capitals because he was struggling. And I actually saw his test results improve. And I started with what's the right way to teach, the Pythagorean theorem. What's the most meaningful way to do this? It's backed with science. Then customized it for the modality that I knew my child would respond the best to. And then I saw the test scores improve because of that. And it kind of goes to this whole conversation we're having, is that connection and kind of ability to show that we're changing behaviors and they're learning, and that kind of downstream effects of those moments of learning are actually being impactful, is where
Mhm.
I think that we're going to have a huge opportunity to pair, what we're creating with content and with AI, and then the business challenges that our organizations are actually facing. A manufacturing company that's going to be retooling, or we have an opportunity to train mid-level leaders on the things that they're about to experience, and then see the outcomes of when they actually go through that retooling process in their organization. We can provide just-in-time training or training in the moment for manufacturing techs when they're working on new equipment that customizes. You learned, the equipment this way on the past model, and now that it's a new model, here's the differences while they're learning. We can see defect rate drop. Like, there's ways that we can start customizing the content and making it more valuable in the moment for organizations at various different levels. And it's not always about just creating content quickly. We have an opportunity to like really pair it with business challenges and be more consultative in nature in the way that we create and deliver content. So I know I got a little bit away from kind of the initial question there, but I think that face validity and starting with, here's the, tried and true method of,
Mhm.
changing behaviors through the content is really where a lot of this starts. That it's not just going to be who can create the fastest content and make it, look and feel like your organization. It still needs to be backed by science, and it needs to be, tested and validated by peers.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and that's probably the holistic value that a platform and a content company experienced in certain, domains brings to you. So that's still very valuable. If you look at it from a buyer's perspective, and let me on that topic go to our kind of and bring in the bias perspective here. Um, how do you think? And I mean, Gary, I will start with you.
Sure.
Uh, what's the shift that you've seen in the last 6 months when you see it from a bias perspective? And do you think that will change drastically in 2 to 3 years? People are just getting hooked onto AI and the way doing things. So right now it's different, and then 3 years later it's going to be drastically different. Any thoughts on that you can share based on your experience and observation as of
Yeah.
today?
So I think first and foremost, just in terms of how buyers are evaluating learning solutions, one shift that I have noticed is the buyer group, or the decision-making group, is getting more expanded. Now we're involving technology departments. Now, like, there's more legal scrutiny about the way that we're using AI and that we're capturing individuals' data. So it's a very messy time right now from a buyer's group, where we're starting to see like a little bit of solidification around some things, but AI is new for a lot of organizations, especially legal departments have a ton of questions, where they're asking like very, very specific things, and there's not a whole lot of standards right now that kind of govern that you can point back to and say we have these certifications or so forth. So that's just one thing, is like the buyer group is shifting, and it's involving different folks, and it actually takes a lot more effort to actually get everybody on the same page, and help influence decisions for organizations. The other thing that I'd mention is I think that a lot of the AI chatbots and things are starting to become a little bit of a commodity for where we see in this space. So where it was hot topic a year and a half ago at conferences, and it was what everybody was talking about, now it's kind of table stakes for most organizations. So where I see a shift, and where I think, the next 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years is going to start going to, is how can we actually prove the business outcomes? How can you tie, here was the learning, that we provided for an organization, the business challenges that we saw you go through, and here's proof that we've actually moved the needle on those. That's what's going to make a very large, impact, specifically in renewals. But it's going to be things that like buyers are going to be looking for, because honestly, most organizations, from what I've experienced, don't just have one content provider. So you have 6, 7, 9, 15 different, depending on the size of the organization, different partners that you're using in this space. So differentiation is going to be something that's going to be important, and showing that, tying this back to business value, and behavior change specifically, I think is going to be a big shift that buyers are going to be looking for.
Thanks, Gary. And I think that's thanks for getting us started on this particular topic of the how the business outcomes really matter, and some of the things like which were like really exciting for us 6 months back with bots or scenarios and stuff like that. That probably is what everybody's doing. So you need to be able to differentiate really well for the buyers to stick with you and renew and and think that what you're providing is transformational for their organization. So that great points. Poonam, your thoughts on this particular question as to how you are seeing it as a builder of content and technology in the learning
So,
space.
yeah, sure, Shrikant. So there are two or three things I think will happen in next couple of years. One which you talked about is the whole thing about trust. So I think AI will become more trusted and governed and less experimental the way it is today. So I almost think about it like the cloud adoption time where people were very hesitant to move to cloud from on-prem, but over a period that comfort improved. Today, everything is on cloud, right? So similarly, organizations who are very cautious today about AI, like where is my data being stored? Are you going to use it to train my model? How can I switch it on or off? How safe is it? I think some of those hesitations will go away, but that will only come if organized product companies like digital businesses would have a strong governance in place and showcase that over a period of time. The second piece which will happen is learning, like we talked about learning in the flow. Ajit, I think, alluded to that learning will be more out of the LMS now and more in the flow, which means that the learning platform has to become more interoperable and agent ready. And so if integrations could be easier, they can be more easily integrated as an ecosystem. I think that is what buyers will almost assume they will need, or the expectations will be from the digital businesses. And the third is the proof of workforce readiness. And I see that the market has already started moving towards that. I think last week or so we heard the cornerstones workforce AI positioning around workforce readiness. I was at ATD and Dochibu was talking about the whole 365 talent acquisition platform. Skillsoft has been talking around proving skills through their talent intelligence. So there's already move in this direction. And I think buyers will almost start expecting a proof of readiness instead of just completion data. So those are the top two or three trends I think will evolve in next few years.
Yeah. Good points, Poonam. I think from a integration standpoint, also, how buyers are going to get more and more comfortable with AI, how they got with cloud. That's a good analogy. And probably there's also going to be learning of how AI is adopted in other verticals and industries, and it'll probably reflect on learning adoption as well. So I mean, I agree with you in terms of some of those things becoming critical. Ajit, your kind of word on this particular topic as to how are you thinking that the buyers are going to look at learning technology or learning solutions today as well as a few years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, Gary and Poonam covered some of what I wanted to say so eloquently. Obviously the buyers are not buying content anymore; they're buying outcomes. So the procurement question will move from how big is your library to what behavior or capability shift will be measurable in my organization within a defined window of time. So the commercial models are always anchored in workforce readiness and outcomes through learning. So more outcome linked terms, more sort of risk sharing is becoming a part of the buyer conversation, right? The pure sort of the seat-based licensing is on its way out. Secondly, Poonam talked about this. LMS learning experiences don't sit on its own island anymore, right? The integration and interoperability discussions are becoming sort of day one expectations. No implementation phase, month and week long customization in implementation. Buyers expect ecosystem native implementations from the first conversation, connecting to things like HRIS, ATS, CRM, ERP, workforce management systems, and to AI assisted agents across all of these ecosystems that already use us, right? So sort of this buyers know as much as the providers know about what AI can and cannot do already. So it is a two-way street now that these expectations are being brought forward for, buyers are asking, for example, do you support MCP servers? Do you support agent-to-agent protocols, right? So the provider that shows up with an integration roadmap rather than working integrations will lose the deal before the second meeting. Thirdly, Gary talked about this, sort of this idea of trust, provenance, and governance as a buying criteria on its own right? So where did the content come from? What happens to my data? Can I trust the model to be grounded in something that's authoritative? Obviously regulated verticals like healthcare, finance, and transport sort of will lead this shift that I call will spread to others, anyone with a serious compliance and regulatory requirement, right? So providers that sort of lean into trust and publish their guardrails, make it auditable, that they ground their AI in then their own validated content rather than sort of generic models will definitely win disproportionately over others. Poonam talked about workforce readiness, right? So learning and workforce readiness are not two different themes anymore, right? They're being converged into a single buying conversation. I mean, the buyer is no longer treating learning as a discrete function. We talked about this across the three of us. The buyer is asking, how does my entire workforce stay ready as the roles change, as the skills change, as the AI reshapes the task to workforce mix, and as compliance obligations evolve, right? Competency management, gaps in the skills, learning delivery, they're all kind of merging into one single conversation. The last one that I want to point out, honestly, I think one that is kind of underappreciated, especially in a broader conversation, and this happens a lot in a regulated space, is this idea that compliance has kind of turned into a financially incentivized exercise in a way it was not before, right? So look, in regulated industries, again, manufacturing, patient safety, healthcare, financial regulations, privacy and protection of customer data, and so on, the sort of the cost of non-compliance translates directly into dollars of penalties paid. So federal penalties, civil penalties, reimbursement denials, licensing risk, accreditation risk, and all of these have significant financial burden. And the increasingly, I expect the buyers to be also designing sort of internal incentive and disincentive structures around compliance and training completion and certification, the currency, the relevancy of keeping the certifications up to date, and then competency validation, right? Which means the buyer's question about learning is no longer sort of, how do I keep my people engaged? It's really about, how do I avoid a 6-figure or a 7-figure or even sometimes an 8-figure regulatory exposure? Providers who can kind of speak their language and who can kind of demonstrably tie the learning to financial and regulatory posture of the organization will be in a fundamentally sort of a stronger position than those who keeps kind of selling on engagement and completion data, right? So the underlying current across all the themes that I talked about is that the buyer is no longer looking for a vendor. The buyer is looking for sort of an embedded capability partner. And the providers who's position themselves as sort of content libraries, will compete on price and so on. The ones who position themselves as outcome partners that are integration ready, who are trustworthy with the defensible and auditable data posturing, and sort of the conversation that's anchored in readiness of the workforce and reducing risk for competence, compliance, non-compliance exposure, will compete on those values. And those are very different conversations today.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think that was kind of, you covered all the points and put together that in a good order. I certainly appreciate that, Ajit. I wish on all of these points like integrations, business outcomes, trust, personalizations, and so forth, we could go, one step deeper. I'm sure, in the AI world, as you're building stuff, my questions would be how to do some of those things, with hopefully when we have a more time, we'll do that. But in the interest of time, let me do a quick summary of our discussion. And I think it's the times are changing, and therefore, buyers, if you are building content, the one of the key elements, and I think Gary, Ajit, all of you alluded to this, like business outcomes is going to be super critical. Like if you're not, if you just focused on seed-based licensing or volume of content and stuff like that, those things are not going to win you the deals moving further, or get you the renewals that you want. And same, I mean, the other important part, we also discussed a lot about, hyper personalized learning and how to leverage AI to build it, to deliver it, and use, of course, there is a whole data centric approach and a learning design and experience related approach that we talked about, how to kind of encompass that whole thing together. We also talked about, the trust factor, and that could be a big differentiator when it comes to compliance and, certification based training or highly regulated, environments. And finally, last but not least, the whole learning design part and bringing the learner as a central element, and focusing and building experiences that makes that transformation or capability development or competency building easier, and more personalized, and real time, is frictionless, like we talked about, are the important things that we need to do. So thank you for sharing this, and I'm sure, like I said, there were many other questions of how part we didn't cover much, but I'm sure there'll be another opportunity to do that. Before I open it up for audience questions and take a few of them very quickly, about Harbinger, we work with organizations, digital learning solution providers, as well as enterprises, transforming and helping them, deliver solutions that transform the way people work and learn. Core services which we do is content development as well as product development, and AI plays a big part of that, how we do it. We At the end of this, there should also be a survey. You can take let us know your feedback, and if you need to consult with us more or learn more about Harbinger, about our consulting services, engineering services, feel free to reach out at the email given below. And on that note, let me just see if we can take a few questions at least.
Yeah, Shrikant. There was one that was posted already from Seth for myself about one-on-one
Yeah.
tutoring is not necessarily personalization, and I agree.
Yeah.
I think the kind of the customization that we're seeing right now for a lot of content and learning solutions is for organizations. We don't have a common language, what we call a business challenge for one organization or what might show up in content. They might have their own language for that. So we're seeing AI customizations like in this part, and I wouldn't necessarily call that personalization. And I agree that there's not a whole lot of data around personalization right now, whether it's effective or even a viable solution. I think right now number. It's a data problem. Understanding, what individuals prefer and how it actually connects to them learning is something that a lot of people are trying to solve right now. So while I was talking in kind of anecdotes of what I've seen with my son, my real kind of takeaway from that was really connecting it to the business. I could see his test scores change when it was a different person teaching him what the Pythagorean theorem was. It wasn't his teacher who he doesn't like. It was a soccer player who he adores, and he paid more attention. So once again, that was just anecdotal. That wasn't to mean that there was a hard tie to, that level of personalization. So I wanted to make sure I addressed that. I tried to type it up, but it was just taking me too long.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary, for taking that question. And I agree. I mean, there's in different industries, different um, whether you're doing how you're doing or delivering the training based on the audience, the personalization part can be very different. So it's not like a one way of thinking about personalization. That's great. I'm sure, since we're at the top of the hour, I would probably say thank you at this point of time to everyone who joined us. Of course, if there are more questions, do post it. We will send it to the panelists and get their answers out when we do a final post of this webinar when we publish it. So, but once again, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Gary, Ajith, Poonam for this wonderful discussion. Like I said, it does make me think that we should go a little deeper, and I'm sure we'll get those opportunities to get your views on some of those points that you raised. And I sincerely thank you for spending the time here and sharing your views.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sajid. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Poonam. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.